Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the powerful and often invisible forces that drive some of our most puzzling behaviors. You know, those urges that seem to pop up out of nowhere and the habits we just can't seem to shake.
So let's start with a really fascinating question. Why on earth would someone steal something they could easily afford and don't even need? Now, this question is the key to understanding a condition called kleptomania, but it also opens the door to two incredibly powerful forces that shape all of our behaviors: impulsivity and compulsivity. Let's unpack this. Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the urge itself. Then, we'll define our key players, impulse and compulsion. We're going to explore their tangled relationship, see how they can fuel addiction, and then we'll use all of that to solve the kleptomania puzzle, leaving you with a really simple framework to understand the whole thing. All right, let's start with a real-life example. It's so easy to judge these kinds of behaviors from the outside, but when you take a closer look, you start to see the complex inner world that's really driving the urge. Meet Anne. She would steal things she didn't need and could easily buy. But here's the thing, it wasn't about the items themselves. It was all about the feeling, that rush of gratification and relief it gave her in that moment. And this really highlights the core conflict, doesn't it? A behavior that brings this short-term pleasure, but in the long run causes massive distress. So, to really understand Anne's story, we need to meet the two main characters at play here: impulsivity and compulsivity. Now, they might sound kind of similar, but believe me, their motivations are worlds apart. First up, we have impulsivity. The best way to think about this, it's like flooring the gas pedal. It's that urge for an immediate reward, that do-it-now voice in your head that totally ignores the consequences. The goal is super simple: instant gratification. And then you've got compulsivity. If impulsivity is the gas pedal, this is more like a gear that's just stuck. It's a repetitive action that's completely lost its original purpose. It's not about getting a reward anymore. It's just this mindless habit, often driven by the need to relieve some kind of anxiety. So here's the crucial point. When you see them side by side like this, the difference is crystal clear. Impulsivity is all about pleasure seeking, chasing a reward. Compulsivity is often about avoiding harm, where the action itself just becomes the habit. One is chasing a high, while the other is just stuck in a loop. So, is it just a simple tug of war in the brain? Are we either impulsive or compulsive? Well, the reality is a whole lot more complex, and honestly, a lot more interesting. For years, the thinking was that these two forces were on a single spectrum. You were either a risk-seeking, impulsive type, or you were a risk-averse, compulsive type. The idea was you couldn't really be both. But now we know that's just not the case. They're actually two separate traits. Think of it like height and weight, right? You can be tall and heavy, or short and light, or any other combination. Well, the same thing goes for impulsivity and compulsivity. And this is a huge shift in understanding because it's the key to unlocking the puzzle of behavioral addictions. Okay, let's see how this plays out in a scenario that might be a bit more familiar: substance use. It's a classic example of how that impulsive gas pedal can eventually lead to the compulsive stuck gear. So this shows the typical progression. At first, the use is impulsive, right? It's driven by the pleasure of the reward. But with repetition, the brain literally starts to rewire itself. The behavior becomes a compulsion, and it's driven not by pleasure anymore, but by the need to avoid the pain of withdrawal. It's a major shift from seeking a high to just escaping a low. All right, now let's take everything we've learned about these two forces and the addiction pathway, and let's apply it back to our original question about kleptomania. This is where all the pieces of the puzzle are really going to start to fit together. In kleptomania, what we're seeing is a perfect storm of both forces. That buildup of tension and the thrill of the act itself, that's pure impulsivity. But that repetitive, irresistible urge to steal things of no real value, that's the compulsivity kicking in. It's the exact point where these two drives intersect. And this is not just some theoretical puzzle, you guys. While kleptomania only accounts for about 5% of all shoplifting, its impact is very, very real. We're talking an estimated $500 million a year in the US, not to mention the immense personal suffering it causes. This chart is actually really helpful because it shows how kleptomania is different from other conditions that might sound similar. With compulsive buying, the whole goal is to get things, and the items are paid for. With OCD, the driver is usually a desire to avoid harm, not to seek a thrill. These little distinctions are super important. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, it's a simple but really powerful framework that can help us understand and address these behaviors without just slapping on simplistic labels. It's called the ABC model, and it gives us a much more complete picture. A stands for affect. Those are the emotional triggers, like stress or depression, that can kick things off. B is for biology. That's the brain's reward system that gets rewired. And C is for cognitive control, the part of our brain that acts as the brakes, which, thankfully, can be strengthened with therapy. And this, right here, is the most important point of all. These behaviors are not a simple lack of willpower. They are a complex mix of impulse, habit, emotion, and brain chemistry. And understanding this helps us move away from judgment and toward a much more compassionate and effective approach. So, I'll leave you with a final question to think about. Where do you see this dance between impulse and compulsion in your own life? Is it the endless scroll in your phone, or maybe that one-click purchase you didn't really need? It's something to think about. Thanks for watching.